False confessions are a big problem for our criminal justice system. A study in 2003 found that false confessions were the leading cause of wrongful convictions, and according to the Innocence Project, more than 2/3 of homicide convictions overturned with DNA evidence were caused by false confessions. My name is Jeff Brown. I'm the legal writer at the State Bar of Wisconsin. I'm here today to talk to Dave Thompson, the president of WZ, an international training organization that specializes in non-confrontational interview and interrogation techniques. Dave has been with WZ since 2014, and he was named president earlier this year. He's scheduled to give a presentation at Forensic Justice Institute in January that's titled Forensic Science, the Dangers of Misclassification and False Confessions. Welcome, Dave. Thanks for talking with me.
Great. Glad to be here. One of my favorite topics to discuss definitely is not just investigative interviewing, but when it goes wrong.
Right. I see you're a Buffalo Bills fan there.
I think more people should be Buffalo Bills fans.
I want it known I supported them in each of those 4 Super Bowls.
Yeah. I'm from Buffalo, New York originally. I'm in the Chicago area now, but I'm a loyal fan of a team that took a 17-year break from the playoffs, but we're good again. So now it's okay. Now it's acceptable to have a Bills helmet behind me.
Well, and who knows? I mean, maybe the Packers and Bills meet up. We'll see what happens. I found a video of you recently talking about legislation since enacted in Illinois that prohibited the police lying to minors during interrogations. Is that sort of thing what drives most false confessions?
When you look at false confessions, there's a whole litany of red flags and common contributors. And one of the main contributors is known as the false evidence ploy, which is when an investigator lies about the existence of evidence, and often in combination also lies about potential consequences associated with whatever the action that was. So legislation, we're really excited in both Illinois and Oregon. We just were able to get a law passed with some great colleagues at the Innocence Project who really drove that charge. And there's a lot of states, once they found that those states were able to pass such kind of a reform movement, there's several other states reaching out looking to do the same thing. So excited about that.
Perhaps reach critical mass here at some point in the next couple of years on that issue.
Yeah, I mean, the Supreme Court ruled decades ago that it's legal to lie to a subject in an interrogation room. What's kind of crazy is when, we were excited, of course, as most people, when this law got passed. And as we're telling people, hey, you can no longer lie to juveniles during an interview, a lot of people are thinking, what do you mean you were allowed to do that in an interview? And so I think that's the concept of, an innocent subject in the room doesn't recognize that law enforcement had the authority to actually lie to you. So then you take it as truth, which is part of what causes the result of a wrongful conviction or false confession.
Wow. What are some of the other drivers of false confessions other than false evidence or lying?
What the research shows, and there's such a growing body of research right now from some really, really incredible academics, Saul Kassan and Richard Leo, and some of the advocacy groups of Innocence Project and the Center for Integrity and Forensic Sciences that are kind of collecting all this data from exonerations. And then you go back and figure out, well, what happened in that interview that contributed to the false confession? What were the common characteristics? And collectively, it looks like there's 3 main causes. There's misclassification, which is how does an innocent person become the target of the investigation in the first place? There's coercion, which is, the lying about evidence, maybe minimizing the consequences, making threats potentially, right, for consequences if you don't cooperate. And the third piece is often contamination, meaning did I provide details to the subject during the interview, or maybe show a crime scene photo, so when they eventually confess, it's not their words, it's words that they were already heard or images that they already seen. So it's usually those are kind of the 3 pathways that we see to false confessions.
So would that be an example of contamination, the offering up evidence or a crime scene photos you mentioned that person wouldn't have access to otherwise, and then does it become part of their memories if they think subconsciously they actually did see it even though they didn't? Or
yeah, that's a really good question. There's different types of false confessions. So you got voluntary, which are minimal. That's when somebody wants to come forward and confess with no really input from the police. They want to take credit for the crime or cover for somebody else. That's probably the smallest amount of false confessions. The other 2 there's one that, like you just mentioned, which is this kind of coerced internalized, which means a subject actually has memory distrust and thinks, well, maybe, okay, if they're telling me I did do it, if the evidence is stating I did it, maybe I did blackout, maybe I was drunk. And that it's terrifying. People leave the interview actually thinking maybe I did do it. The other type of false confession is a coerced compliant, which means the person knows they didn't do it, and they don't feel like the detective or the investigator is going to listen to that side of the story, and they're weighing their options and decide, I'm just going to tell them what I did and let the lawyers figure it out afterwards. And they have, faith in the criminal justice system that the truth will set them free, their innocence will prevail, and then they leave, and then that's the end of the story.
Would the Central Park Five be an example of that latter category?
Definitely. I think that, yeah, I mean, those five men and kids at the time, right, now exonerated, which is great, is you can see all three of those problems, right? You see misclassification, which is, why were they targeted in the first place? Was there racial bias at play, faulty eyewitness identification, confirmation bias? Then we look at coercion. There were threats and promises made. There were comments made that might minimize consequences, right? Hey, it's not a big deal if you cooperate with us, it's going to be okay. And then there was contamination, where you're interviewing one subject and you tell them, we know that this happened and this happened. We know that there's 3 other people there. And so when they tell you, well, yeah, those 3 people were there, is that coming from the detective or is that coming from the subject themselves?
So WZ, your company does training in this, and I assume that a lot of what you're working with is law enforcement personnel. What's the reaction? Is it always positive? Is there sometimes reticence for this type of training, or what's your experience been?
Yeah, I think this is a good topic to spend some time on. Is, law enforcement wants to solve crime. They want to protect the community. They want to represent and support the victim. And so oftentimes what happened, and specific to kind of this presentation that we'll talk about at this symposium, investigators are trained to use certain techniques. They've been trained for decades that you are allowed to lie about evidence. That's how they're trained. So they're going to execute, they're allowed to do it. So they're going to execute that. And the other thing to think about, when you have forensic science or faulty forensic science, right? When you have an investigator who's told by a medical professional about the cause of death, or something kind of ridiculous like hair analysis or bite mark, right, analysis that we know is faulty, the investigator now goes into this interview armed with this information, and then inherently has a confirmation bias. I've got the guilty person. Let me get the confession to close the case. And so when we train law enforcement, they want training. They want to do it better. They want to do it the right way. They want to protect the community. And also they know if they put the wrong person away, the actual perpetrator is still out there committing more crime. So yeah, I would think it's overwhelming support from law enforcement to do it the right way. They want the training. They want to know what are some of the issues with it. They want to understand, but it's difficult for an investigator to be an expert on every single piece of an investigation, right? A detective may not be an expert on the fallibility of bite mark analysis, right? They're relying on an expert to give them that information. So it's education from A to Z, really, in the investigation.
Great. Anything else about the presentation potential attendees should know about?
Yeah, I think we'll spend some time on, again, this misclassification piece primarily. So how forensic sciences play a part in putting the wrong person in front of a detective well before all of this coercion even happens. And there's a lot of research out there that shows when a investigator has a presumption of guilt of the person they're sitting in front of, meaning they've got a witness that says they did it or something points to this person, investigators actually change their behavior because they feel like this is the guilty person. And often the line of questioning changes and becomes more direct, coercive, techniques start to apply. And so for all those attending, when they're analyzing confessions or critiquing a confession to see, is it reliable? Is it voluntary? And is it true or false? We're going to really dive into what are some of those common red flags you can go back and critique, not just what happened in that room, but how did we get in that room in the first place? That's really going to be the takeaway from the presentation.
Okay. Okay, great. Well, Dave, thanks again for your time. Look forward to seeing you at the Forensic Justice Institute. It's January 20 and 21. The divisional round of the playoffs starts the next day, and hopefully the Bills and the Packers will still be alive.
I can't, if not, I'm going to be maybe depressed that day. But yeah, I'm looking forward to a great panel of speakers I saw. So it should be a really good event. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Thank you, and look forward to seeing you then. Thanks.